What are some common geopolitics misconceptions you see on Reddit? Most people don't understand Latin America and our nation's issues: corruption, nepotism and brain drain going north. That the vast majority of politics is reactionary rather than precautionary. Very rarely do people have a grand plan. Most of the time they're just reacting to things as they happen. I think people still look at things from a very binary Cold War POF, just with China instead of Russia. Obviously it's true that the USA and China are the two biggest superpowers, but geopolitics is becoming more and more influenced by smaller regional powers. That geopolitics operates on some sort of global moral framework. The three main schools of IR models the interplay between realpolitik, ideal-based constructs, language and culture quite well, but is not widely acknowledged in discussions. That China wants Taiwan because of microchips, embarrassed smiley face. ITT. 1. That realism is right. 2. That institutionalism is right. 3. That constructivism is right. Most people don't have a good grasp of China or India. They are viewing the world through a Western lens and think other countries do too. Westerners thinking countries will balkanize at the slightest domestic issues. After establishing some assumptions, taking predictions to the most extreme possible result. For example, China's population is falling at a high rate, so it will collapse as an entity within a decade. In systems there are factors that expedite change, and also factors and people that act as memory of the current state of affairs, preventing change. Do we think China will just lie down and look for no solutions to their problems? That the UN is supposed to be some autonomous global authority. Saudi Arabia isn't even spreading Wahhabism anymore. The Crown Prince is jailing religious leaders. That the good guys always win. Many Indian commentators don't seem to understand they are still decades behind China, both militarily and economically. People give leaders too much credit. They are not evil masterminds, they are just humans making human mistakes, and they care about their own human desires, which for them can be anything from material wealth to a fulfilled sense of duty and empathy. I will never forget when Soleimani was assassinated and there were so many comments convinced World War III was about to start. Like, why would it? That geopolitics are based on morals. Got pretty clear during the India and Russia oil debacle. That you can perfectly understand the world reading exclusively Western point of view. That we are benevolent, kind, and in the right, and the other side are vicious, evil, and wrong. In all seriousness, it's people forgetting the media slant and propaganda. People don't understand that usually there isn't a black and white in geopolitics, and usually there is a lot of gray. In geopolitics, states and nations do what's best for them and usually not what is best morally or ethically. That geopolitics is morally motivated. Can't be tried for war crimes if you didn't sign the Rome Statute. Always comes up in whataboutisms for Iraq. USA never signed, ICC has no jurisdiction over them or any crimes that may have been committed in Iraq. Who didn't sign either? Saudi didn't sign, Russia didn't sign. China, India, the idea of international criminal law only applies to those who wanted it to apply, man shrugging. That United States foreign policy is preoccupied with a responsibility to defend democracy around the world. People don't consider a pragmatic approach to the geopolitical interests of a nation because they are blinded by ideology. Personification of states and of international relations generally, and people becoming overly dramatic or emotional about events including objectively minor occurrences. The number of people that look at international relations and the actions of states and give them traits or attribute to them elaborate personalities as if those interactions were like two regular people interacting. It makes the level of discourse and debate in general on Reddit on IR abysmal. The misguided attempts to show how coldly analytical you are by trying to take all the values-based factors out of geopolitics during an age where values matter a lot. Today the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Metu in that it's in my experience in discussion overall. That's simply because I express an ideal, that I am in no way naive or optimistic. I do understand how things are. Please look up the etymology of utopia, there is a reason it doesn't exist. What I fail to understand as an Indian is even though China's GDP is 6 times India's GDP, how come their public consumption per doesn't show this vast disparity? I mean surely a higher per capita should make this obvious. What am I missing? Geopolitics, as a noun, is a limited one. Geography, demographics and ethnicity are the target variables when making policy. Politics should be getting people to do shit that influence said variables. Ideology, morals and ethics are not worthy if they don't help the previous statement. A big issue I have, if you can explain what's going on in any given event in less than 5 minutes, then you don't know enough to have an opinion. That the rules-based international order exists unironically. That China is a rising power and the US falling. The Reza dictatorship in Iran. Just because society was wearing Western clothes and establishing Western ideologies, doesn't mean they weren't under a strict dictatorship. I'll see pictures floating around Reddit of women before the revolution of Iran in Western clothes and I'm like huck. The J-curve and how it also applies to economics and trade. Many in the West seem to think if only developing nations behaved like us. And don't seem to consider that it might not be an option or a good idea. Predictions. That China is planning to annex Siberia. This makes zero sense, after considering Russia's nuclear arsenal and the fact the Chinese population is moving south, not north. That internal politics doesn't matter. Countries are rational, anthropomorphized beings driven only by a will to expand their powers. The West good, BRICS bad. Western people are too much entitled although they did 90 of the bad things in the history. That the governments of the world somehow represent their citizens. That capitalism is the best of terrible options. That people are not able to care for each other without violent state coercion. That GDP is important in a globalized trade system. The utter misconception people have towards Asian multinational alphabetical superarrangements like SCO, BRICS, ZARC etc. It's weird how BRICS is seen as some anti-West NATO in making. The notion that anything green, renewable energy, energy-efficient building standards, electric vehicles, technological innovation that challenges the petrochemical industry is intrinsically born from a conspiracy of scientific communism and its goals of unseating the Bretton Woods hegemony. That somehow countries are bound to react in certain specific parameters like they are country balls and not representations of the hopes and aspirations of millions of individual citizens. 1. China bad, US good. 2. Trump is destroying everything. 3. Muslim migrants are the cause of XYZ. 4. The far-rights are making things worse. 5. Chinese debt trap, Russian Wagner and all other evil guys are taking over Africa. 6. Israel is important for democracy in Middle East. 7. India is some sort of mini USA mostly by Indian Redditors. Declining fertility is caused by higher cost of living, lower incomes. The truth is the reverse. That China is some sort of superpower, and that the United States is somehow in decline. That the Chinese yuan can surpass or replace the ESU dollar.